Hey, Madison, are you there?
I am. Hi, Ken.
Hey, how are you? Hey, I joined as an attendee. I don't know if I meant to do that, but it says I'll be muted the whole time.
Oh, no, I promoted you to a panelist. That's what you just had to accept.
All right. Well, I'm using my phone as a backup because I had such a terrible time last time.
Oh, okay.
So if I
Oh,
have
so are you this 830 number?
Yep.
Okay, then I'm going to rename that to your name just so that I can keep track of who's joined.
Okay. Should I use this or should I use I'm out in the country and I've got Wi-Fi that fluctuates. That's why I'm early.
Oh, okay. I mean,
safer.
Whichever one is more reliable.
Okay. Well, I've got the number here. I'll just stick on the video, but if I fall off, that's what happened to me and I'll dial in.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Hi, Terry.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How's things up at the mountains?
Oh, getting warmer by the day.
Oh, well, I would rather have some more snow up there.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Okay, Michelle, so far your screen looks fine.
Is my sound coming across okay?
Yeah, it sounds fine.
Oh, great. Hi, everybody. I was having real technical difficulties on my Zoom meetings earlier today with my computer. So I think I got lucky and it started randomly working to no fault of my own. Ken, how you doing?
I'm doing good, I randomly have internet issues here from time to time, but I've got like 3 backups and I've already went through it with Madison, so I'll stay on this time.
All right, very nice.
It's good to see you, Michelle.
Good to see you.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, I don't know if I need to ask you as part of the meeting, but I did go through in detail the whole deal, and I did come up with some questions and stuff, some of which I don't think we want to air with the whole group because they're technical, but can I send those to you or do I mark up the document? What's the best way?
Yep, you can send them. You can mark up the document either way, and then we'll look them over with Terry and get them checked out. That's very appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, will do. I'll do that post meeting.
Hey there, everybody on this Zoom call. So this is Michelle Matier. I wanted to see if I can ask Amanda K. if you can hear me, if that's Amanda Meyer.
I thought it might be Amanda Crost.
Oh, great.
She's on the list.
Well, then that's great. We should get her promoted either way.
I tried.
Oh, okay. Okay. So long as we tried.
Yes. She hasn't accepted the invitation to be promoted yet.
Okay. I think we should give it just a couple more minutes since folks are getting home from work. Oh, she said Amanda Crost. Okay. And so sorry if I said your name wrong. You're welcome to be, Amanda, you're welcome to be a panelist if you'd like. And that way you can vote on things and raise your hand and the such. Okay. Terry, did I say thank you for joining us tonight? I was re-reviewing the ordinance and thinking, thank the Lord Terry can join us tonight.
All righty. Well, and I will say, I was starting to do a number of we still have a lot of little small edits and things,
Right.
but we've gotten all the substantive things that the committee would want to discuss tonight. So we're making progress.
We're making progress. We have our other superstar with us tonight. Dr. Flewelling was able to join us as well. So Lindsay, thank you very much.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool. Okay.
She's been the real go-to.
Great.
And poor Lindsay, there were several times that I tried to make her a lawyer. So
Oops.
and she finally just said, Michelle, I'm not. So thank you, Lindsay.
I don't think my sound. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, I think Terry and I talked on the phone a couple months ago.
Oh, wonderful. That's great news.
Yeah, we did a couple of times. You were very helpful, Lindsay. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was nice to see you, even though not in person.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sending some nagging texts to a few more people to remind them, and then we'll get going. Okay, it's enough nagging. Lindsay, did you have a chance to check out our draft?
I just skimmed it, so not totally in depth, but yeah. A little bit.
Yeah, it's been a haul. I won't lie. It's been a real haul, but I think we're going to end up with a really good document for Minturn at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's exciting. Lots of work being done.
Lots of work being done. And, these small towns are so specific that it can require a lot of intricacies that Terry has brought up throughout this process that I had no idea I would ever even have to think of. So it's been very appreciative to have Terry's background. Terry's on does historic preservation down for Denver. He's on the board.
Yeah, historic Denver.
Yeah, so. And, Ken did a bunch of renovation in the historic district down in San Antonio. So Ken's very familiar with historic renovation and the costs that ensue.
I think, one great thing about historic preservation ordinances is that they can be shaped for each community, but that also makes it really hard to get it how you want it to be, so it'll work.
Right. All right. Well, I say we, we've got 9 folks on the call, minus me, so 7, 6. So I say we get started, and whoever can, hop on as we go, that's wonderful. And we're thrilled, and we'll go from there. And hi, Tom Warren. I hope you've had some safe travels.
Too much travels.
Oh, right. That sounds about right. Well, thank you everybody for your time tonight. We appreciate your willingness to review these documents, to take a look at what we're trying to do. And then most importantly, your willingness to provide feedback so that we can get feedback from the community and ensure that we're putting a document together that's representative of this committee. From here, after this committee gives its comments, and they're not final comments, this will be going through another round of adjustments, and then it will go to the Planning Commission, where I will be doing a write-up along with Madison of all of the work this committee has done to date and the comments and feedback that have been provided. But then we of course encourage anyone from this committee to provide comments and feedback at both the Planning Commission meeting and the Town Council meeting. So this is not the final stab, if you will. With that being said, Madison, if it's okay with the committee, I would be interested in working off of the clean document, given how annihilated, the red line is. And we as staff have questions for you, the committee. And once we get through our questions, we were hoping that the committee would ask, their questions so that we can make sure we hopefully have a chance to get everything covered by 7:30. So does that sound like a process that can work for everybody?
Yep. Great.
We might be doing, hand raises or things like that to try to get an understanding of where people stand on certain issues. So the first item we wanted to address is,
Michelle, do you want me to share my screen?
you know what, that would be so great. Thank you. So everyone can see what the heck I'm talking about.
Okay. All right, let's just make this bigger so it's all one page. Okay.
Thank
What
you.
section is first?
19-20. 19-20, subsection 2. You'll see on here, we have down 19-20 subsection 2 is composition of the Historic Preservation Board. And subsection 2 says at least 2 of the voting members shall be full-time residents, property or business owners, or designated representatives of property or business owners within the town. We wanted to get an understanding from the group as to how folks felt about that. So that would be at least 2 of the, is it 5? 2 of the 5 voting members.
A question and a comment, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
When I read that, I think you're trying to get, people that are involved locally, right? But that's what you want in those 2 members. Is that correct?
I would say
Because
so.
the way this reads, you could have somebody who's a property owner who's never been to Minturn. It says full-time resident, comma, business or property owner. And I'm just trying to figure out, because you have other places you can have others in there, but is this one supposed to be folks that are really familiar with Minturn?
Right, Ken, thank you for that, because we had talked about that in a prior meeting. And we just, no, we talked about it to ensure that that would be the case, exactly what you're talking about. And where we came to as an internal team on staff is we felt that that would get vetted through in the letters of interest and the applications for the council to appoint. So that if someone applied, but they are never here and, and really have no, commitment to the community, and we don't ever see them and no one ever hears from them, we felt that that would come through in their application to the council. But we can make note of that, Terry, in case there's maybe additional language that we can consider in either this clause, or perhaps it's something that we vet through when we create the application form and the letter of interest requirements for when someone applies to be on the committee or
Right.
on the board.
If you'd like, I'll also send you what I came up with just as a suggestion for you.
That'd be great. Thank
All
you.
right. I'll do that.
Okay.
Thank
Got
you.
it.
The next question we had was same section, subsection, same article, subsection 3. At least 2 of the voting members shall be professionals or shall have extensive expertise in a preservation related discipline. This group has talked about that option before as well, and the need to have some experts, or not experts, but people that are familiar with historic preservation on some level. How do people feel about that? Thumbs up. Tom, you have extensive historic preservation background. What do you think?
I think it's a good direction. I just am fearful that when you already have some troubles to fill out volunteer board positions, that would become a difficult thing to fulfill.
And that's interesting, Tom, because our other attorney, Mike Sawyer, said the same thing. He said, is there a concern about Minturn being able to fill these positions given it's only a town of 1,100 people? And he recommended we take that requirement back to this group to get final feedback, given how tiny we are. Anybody else out there that has some feedback on that?
Hey, everybody. I was just, was it at
Hi,
a
Greg
previous
Sparhawk.
meeting? Hey, was it at a previous meeting determined that it was 2 out of 5 versus the 60%? And then I guess also to that point, the 5 voting members versus 3 voting members, with the kind of speaking to the size of the group.
So it was at a previous meeting that we changed the percentage requirement to an actual number. So that's where we got just 2 out of 5. And
I thought it was 3 out of 5 too, personally, but I know I missed one meeting because I had connection problems. So, but anyway,
well, wait a minute. Ken, if you thought it was 3, and Greg, did you think it was 3?
I did. I just
Okay.
based off of the survey and what the feedback from what the other meeting was.
Okay, well, then Madison, let's go back through and review our notes on that. Maybe that needs to be 3.
at the time, I don't think we had a number, but we said the majority should be kind of residents or locally engaged business owners or property owners.
Okay.
Locally engaged property owners, something like that was
Great.
what I.
Then if there's no contradiction by anybody else on this call to the 3, we're going to change it to 3. Okay.
Great when you have a small group, huh?
Well, the goal is community feedback. So
I'm not. I'm making a joke here.
I swear, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's very, yes,
You know,
for decision
one
making.
thought too, because I know you're wrestling. I really appreciate the comment that somebody made about, are you going to be able to get the folks listed under 3 there?
Mhm.
You could treat 3 kind of like 4. You could say it could also include, you say you have to have at least 3 are residents, et cetera. And then you could have other folks with these kind of expertise appointed by the town council or something, I don't know, or appointed by whatever, fill in the blank. And that way, if you can't find them, then you have a way out.
And you know what, Terry Garrell, who I don't think I introduced to everybody, so I apologize, everyone, just so you know. Attorney Terry Garrell is on this call with us tonight. He is an attorney with Holland and Hart down in their Denver offices and has an extensive background in historic preservation. So I will say that Terry did add that clause later in this document where the council can add additional quote unquote non-voting experts as needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just saying you might do the same thing with number 3. It says, I mean, in effect, that's what number 3 are. They're voting experts. So you can add voting experts appointed by the town. I'm just trying to give you a way out of the problem that somebody just raised, which is that you can't find anybody who fits those descriptions, so then you got 2 vacancies, right?
Right.
But if you say that the council could add people with expertise that are voting members, this kind of expertise, then it's just an optional thing. So if we can't find them, then we'll just get 2 other people that don't have that expertise. Does that make sense? Or am I confusing?
Terry, does that make sense to you?
Well, I would point out a couple things. First is the people under 2 and 3, one person could fit both those categories.
Yes. Yep.
And so there has to be 5 members. And so if what you're trying to do is give yourself the ability, if you wanted to change 3, if the effort here is to try to say they shall try to find 2 people, but if they don't find 2 people meeting those qualifications, then they can appoint whoever they want.
Yeah.
We could do that.
Something like that, I think, might make sense based on the feedback that I heard, which I agree with.
So what you're saying is you want to give town council an option if can't find these.
Sounds like we need to, from what I just heard.
I wonder, excuse me, if you could favor or have some language about favoring people in those disciplines, like if multiple people are applying for the same seat.
Yeah, we certainly could. We should say that we can say that that at least 2 voting members, that the town council shall attempt to appoint at least 2 voting members from these professions. But if they don't have applicants, they can appoint whoever the town council deems qualified.
Right.
That's perfect. I think that's a great solution.
Okay. I've made a note and we'll get the specific language for it.
Great. Okay.
And let me just, before you leave this, Michelle, I did want to point out that under, I don't know if you're going to officers or not under 19-2-40, but it might be worth discussing the fact that we have a chairman and a vice chairman. In our definitions, we still have a definition for secretary. So that was one of the points I was going to recommend to you, is that we say here in officers that the town employee that's designated by town council, at least one employee, shall serve as secretary of the commission, because that's what I was understanding the result of our discussion was. And if everybody in the group believes that's the way we want to go, then I'll put that in here.
Is there any opposition from anyone in the group on that matter? Sounds like we're doing it, Terry.
Okay.
Thanks, Shelley.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
No, thanks for coming. Shelley, I just gave everybody a heads up that staff had some questions. We wanted to start off by asking the committee. And then once we get through those, we'll open it up to committee comments and feedback. And we're through question number 2 right now. We're moving on to question 3.
Okay.
The section 19-290 discusses monthly meetings. And I think where we got to as staff is that there could be a real need for monthly meetings for at least the first year, given that there's probably going to be a lot done. What we thought would be maybe a way to get around this is if in the future, if the commission does not have the need for a meeting on a monthly basis, they can just cancel the meetings. Or if it gets to a point where the commission is so, not having anything coming up, then maybe they reconsider, monthly meetings. But at this point, the ordinance and all of the timelines associated with the different processes involved are all based on the commission meeting monthly for at least the first year. And that was something that this team, kind of went back and forth on. So I wanted to bring it to y'all's attention.
No, I think it's better to have whoever gets appointed to this commission be prepared to meet on a monthly basis. And if there is nothing to discuss, then the meetings get canceled. Similar to like a town council or a planning commission meeting, you have set days and times where people commit to those meeting dates. And then that way everyone kind of knows,
Right.
what your schedule is going to be for, it's on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock, the first Tuesday of every month. People could plan something like that, as opposed to just going, well, let's send out a doodle poll and figure out when we can all meet.
Agreed. Okay. Great. Feel good about that. The next question we had was section 19-340. This section discusses historic districts. And Terry, although you had no idea I was going to do this to you, I deeply apologize. I hope maybe you could talk to this committee about what we kind of did here with setting up the process for a historic district, and then that way folks can ask questions about that.
Okay, so a historic district, and this is something that was creatively done in Denver when they created the initial downtown historic district. Typically, people will think of a district as having geographical boundaries, like a 3 square block area, for example. And then within that area, there could be a certain amount of buildings that are historically significant, what we call contributing buildings, contributing structures, and then other buildings that are non-contributing. And so that is an option for a historic district, that it could have typical geographical boundaries. It's also possible that you can create a historic district, and Denver's initial downtown historic district was structured this way. It is a grouping of buildings that are non-adjacent, and in some cases separated by many blocks, and the intervening property between those particular buildings are not part of the district. So let's just say that we have 10 buildings downtown, just those buildings can be designated as a district, as a grouping of 10 buildings without having any, in that particular case, you wouldn't have any non-contributing structures because your entire district would be comprised of contributing structures. So we're giving the town the flexibility with districts to do it on a geographic basis or on a building grouping basis. Is that the explanation you were looking for, Michelle?
It is, and I think that this committee might have some follow-up questions because this was something where we had quite a few questions in our previous 2 meetings about historic districts in general. So we do have our 2 experts, Terry and Lindsay, with us tonight if anyone has questions on historic districts.
Well, I would toss out a question, and it relates to this, but also something really important, and that is, what % of the owners within the district need to approve the district, right? And so does this allow us to then group like all of the historic buildings into a historic district? And then it requires X vote in opposition of that larger district to, I'm worried about the 20% can derail a district.
I don't believe that we have the 20% requirement anymore.
Oh, good.
I think
Is it a
there's 2
majority or-
questions there. Is one is, could you group all your buildings under one district? And the answer would be theoretically yes. And the reason that was done historically in Denver was because they were really facing some imminent demolition of buildings. So they wanted to not have to deal with a large number of properties and owners, et cetera. And correct me, I don't think I'm wrong on this, but we did away with the requirement for a specific vote of property owners. So a property owner can object, a group of property owners could object, but there's not a minimum threshold of either approval to get it done or rejection to derail it.
I'm glad to hear that, because I did read that in section 4. I think it's section 4E. It said 25% or more oppose it. And so, that may be a cleanup item. I was going to flag that for you, Michelle.
Now, let me just look at the red line and tell me which section you're in.
Well, I don't have it open in front of me, but it
Which
was
article you're, okay.
my notes. I'm working off of notes I scribbled here, but it was section 4, and it was in I believe I wrote section 4, and it was in 1C or 1E.
Let me go to that red line. On that section.
So that numbering is kind of screwy in the red line.
Yeah.
Well, that is actually struck out in the red line, that designation procedure.
Oh, okay. Well, somehow, I look, if it's gone, I withdraw the comment.
Okay.
Great question, though. No.
Great, because I was really
It's a
worried
good
about
clarification. It's a good
Yeah.
clarification point because it is a very significant change from what was in the original draft.
Well, we just have so many historic buildings in one basket, it's important for us to be thoughtful about this process. And that's great.
And Tom, you've got a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, and I'm so sorry. I am losing my voice. I'm drinking honey to try to make it to where I can talk. But if there is no vote of the property owners downtown, then is this simply a town council vote, and that is what makes it actionable? That's all my question is.
Ultimately, yes, but first it has to go through the Historic Preservation Commission. And then I'll just give a real brief process. So we have various people can nominate properties, and that would include the owners. It would include a member of town council, a member of the commission, possibly some others. Then there's a review procedure process that the commission is going to follow. Initially, the application forms and things will be created by the commission in conjunction with the assistance of the town staff. But then once those forms and that procedure is documented, it's going to be the planning department that receives the application and make sure that it conforms to all the i's are dotted and t's are crossed, then goes to the commission. Then the commission considers it, has a public hearing on it. Then the commission will not itself decide on the designation, but will make, similar to the planning department, will make a recommendation to town council. The recommendation could be approval or non-approval. And the town council could accept that or could be free to not accept that. But ultimately, it is a town council determination as to whether a property is designated or a historic district is created.
Is there any type of appeal process built into this?
The only appeal, well, the answer is on the initial designation is that the appeal process is the same process that anyone would have for appealing a town council decision. It'll be fairly limited. Now, as a subset, when you get into the concepts of some alterations, demolitions, some factors that could affect structures other than the initial determination of designating a property or a district as historic, then there is a structure that's built in there to where there could be a appeal, as it were, or recourse, I'd rather say, to the town council if the commission was refusing to grant an alteration permit or a hardship permit or a demolition acceptance.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, I just had another question. So in my conversations with Shell over the last few weeks about this process, I completely agree that in our holdings, which is fairly significant downtown, that we do have a couple buildings that I would consider historically significant, especially Magusto's, the former Active Energies building. However, I'm just curious, I have another building on the other end of town that has no foundation. It has no sewer, no water. It is in a really, really bad position, but it does look somewhat historic. It is, a timber frame building with some wood siding on it. It was a gas station. We paid a tremendous amount of money to do a cleanup on waste of oil and whatnot that was there. So if this proceeds and someone in town obviously is going to think that that is a historic structure, is that property being taken from me? Because when I read through these documents, I really can't do anything with it then. The renovation process of that building would be so cost prohibitive. And when I look at the parameters for when something is too expensive, what I have to do on showing what I paid for purchase price, it seems almost too much to overcome. So this is where I'm very torn with this. I agree, Magusto's, the Active Energies building, some of our holdings are historic. We would never dream to tear them down, but some of them, that don't have foundations, don't have water and sewer hookups. They need either exponentially expensive renovations or they need to be torn down. What do I do in that situation?
And Terry, if I can kind of rely on you, I felt like there was a section in here, and I'm trying to frantically go through to find that, where if something that certainly meets the age requirement as being designated historic, however, like Tom said, has extenuating situations such as those, that if a demolition were to occur, there was an outline of things that the property owner would do to, save and salvage materials, things like that, so that they could potentially be reused. I felt like we had
the demolition section is Article 7, but there are also some other factors in there. But maybe to get to kind of Tom's overall question, the issue of designating a property or a district as historic, but let's just take a property because it's easier to focus on that. The issue of it is accurate to say that the town council could designate a property as historic, notwithstanding objection by the owner. And the structure in this ordinance is not different than, that's a fairly standard feature now in any ordinances that are adopted, because otherwise the ordinances don't really work. In practice, my observation has been, and of course Denver probably has had more contested designation hearings than any place else in the state, at least typically. And in Denver's, the town councils do not like to do designations that are contrary to the desires of the owner. That they would like to see much more collaborative process. But I can't say that there isn't that possibility. Other options that are in play, depending on the size of your building and the nature of it, sometimes we've seen that smaller historic structures are moved. Sometimes we've seen that elements, the Gates property buildings in Denver is a good example, where through collaboration with various historic preservation entities, the owner worked out that they kept the water tower and relocated it to use as a fulcrum feature of the development. So I won't, having said that, yes, the town can designate against an owner, I will say that there are provisions in here that provide for modification even of historic buildings. And that would include things like the utilities in particular. And there's a provision in here for relocation, and there's a provision in here for demolition. And there's also a provision for consideration of hardship, which can include a number of factors. So there is that harshest potential of designation against the interest of an owner is ameliorated potentially by several options that could be followed at the HPC level, and then also at the town council level.
Hey, Terry, as a follow-up to that, because I hear Tom's concern loud and clear. Is there also a series of tools that Minturn has to help the property owner?
If by tools you mean monetary,
Yeah.
there's
I mean, there's even
so you might be better.
There was.
I'm going to say what's, yeah.
Go
There was a provision in the original model ordinance, and I'll say one thing about, model ordinances that and Michelle's talked about what an arduous process this has been to clean up. Model acts are aspirational and over-inclusive. So it's sort of like somebody giving you a recipe for everything you could think of making for dinner. And then you've got to go through and figure out, okay, what works or what doesn't. One of the elements that staff discussed quite at length was the ability of Minturn to really commit to fiscal inducements or incentives or aid. And ultimately that was taken out of this current draft because there was a feeling among staff that the town just couldn't take on that commitment at this point. So Michelle, you correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah.
I saw the fund. I saw it in at least the version that was attached. I saw it still in there, but I figured that wouldn't fly. But tax, are there, waiving fees, development fees?
Yeah, those kind of things, I think, yes. And those options are certainly available, those kind of inducements. Michelle, am I over speaking on that?
You're not.
Okay. So yes, there's some inducements and some, if I call those, entitlement support, but not pure economic support. Some communities have grants and loans that are forgiven over a period of time. There's all kinds of things that can happen, but obviously before you start doing those things, you've got to be able to know that fiscally you can fund them.
Yep.
And Dr. Flewelling, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you guys do eventually become a CLG, then your local landmarks are eligible for residential and commercial tax credits, which is 35% of the rehabilitation costs. So essentially the property owners would be getting back a third of the costs on any rehabilitation.
You said 35%?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And then, yeah.
And the HBC is empowered to offer assistance, commensurate with what its abilities are and its staffing. They can offer assistance to historic property owners in pursuing making connections, pursuing grants, working with the state, with the appropriate state filings. So they can certainly offer that kind of assistance.
Yeah, especially for commercial properties, that have, there needs to be like some kind of public ability to enter the property, but state historical fund grants could be available for those as well.
Okay.
And one of the areas, and Lindsay, you'd be much better positioned than me to address this, but one of the areas where grants have been particularly favored is where there's an effort to preserve, to keep a historic structure that's in a state of disrepair from falling down. So if there's an immediate need for structural support, an immediate need for replacement of missing windows or glass, something that keeps the building from just falling to the elements, those historically have been fairly well received, those applications at the state level.
And I think there's more, emergency or, funding for those types of smaller projects. There's quite a bit available.
Okay. Any further follow-up questions on that? This is a big part, the big topic.
It really is. We got to get this one right. One of the things we did at the Pearl project was, on a structure like you described, Tom, we just moved it and we made it an amenity. And it worked out really great. The city was happy with it, but it was off our back. And it was something that was significant and meaningful to people. So they also weren't pitchfork and torches at our door.
Minturn doesn't do that, Ken.
Oh, I know, but I'm down in Texas right now. We still have pitchfork, as you guys know. Anyway, I just want to make that hopeful comment to you, Tom.
Yes, thank you. Next up, we have section 19-7-10, subsection 2C. We wanted to bring this to the committee's attention. This committee talks about an estimate of current market value. And does the committee feel like this could potentially be used as a loophole? It was my question, because, right now, town of Minturn, we do follow the property maintenance code. Shelley, I might hit on you a little bit I'm sure you know more about this than I do. But we don't inspect the insides of people's buildings. We only look at, the outsides of the, is the roof falling down, is, something like that. So we don't look at the interiors. So we just wanted to highlight this and bring this to everyone's attention to see if anybody had additional feedback on this and comments that we could kind of rely on here.
Well, just to make your point really clear, what would that look like if it was a loophole? I know you're obviously not sure, but what would that look like?
Our concern here was, well, if someone is, looking at 19-7-10, at looking at this, do they let the interior of the building decay to such a point where it genuinely cannot be rehabilitated, and then now they have, a claim?
Go poke a few holes in the roof and.
Right, because we're not inside buildings. So I didn't know if we were looking for feedback from this committee on this specific issue, that we could get a better direction.
I think one of the challenges with the inside of a building is, a lot of our buildings are so old that they are not up to code.
Right.
No matter how nice they look, they're not up to code. I mean, if anyone's, I did talk to the contractor at the saloon, and holy cow, was that totally out of code, because it was built so long ago. Of course it's going to be out of current code. That's just a given. But for a lot of these places, the asbestos abatement is going to be financially out of reach for some of these owners, potentially out of reach for some owners of buildings. So there is an opportunity that the interior could be in such, not necessarily bad disrepair, but so out of code and so expensive to fix that it would just be easier to demo the entire building and rebuild it than to try to retrofit the inside.
Right. And I guess what we're concerned about is this a way in which, and I don't even know if, I don't know if I'm asking this correctly, but is this a way in which a property owner could utilize that fact to get rid of their historic building?
Mhm. Well, not knowing more, my reaction just reading this is, yeah. I mean, I guess that's possible. I mean,
We do say, let me just add a couple things in here. So in addition to what you're looking at under 19710, in 19720, we have criteria for total demolition. And and then in 30, there's criteria for partial demolition. And when you get in a couple, when somebody applies for a hardship or a demolition permit, we do say in a couple different places that willful or negligent acts by an owner and are not considered failure to perform normal maintenance, failure to, well, I won't get into rental properties, but failure to do normal maintenance and failure to maintain a building would not have to be considered by the commission in coming to a decision as to whether to grant a certificate for either partial or total condemnation. But in terms of tracking, and this is true not just for the interiors of buildings, but it's also true for buildings that receive historic designation and tax credits, that one of the issues let's just say that there's an easement placed on a building in order to get the federal or state tax credits. It's always been an issue whether or not the recipient of that easement has the financial wherewithal to enforce the maintenance provisions. There's always a risk of that. And now the recipients, it's why we've evolved to using easement holders that have sufficient resources to be able to enforce them. But this code, this new ordinance is not adding any enforcement powers on normal maintenance for the interior of the building. And it's focused upon the exterior of the building. So the town is going to have to rely on its existing building code and maintenance codes and for enforcement of those kinds of provisions, whether it be for utilities or heating or air conditioning or asbestos abatement or anything else. This doesn't, I guess maybe that's a long way of saying that problem already exists.
Mhm.
And this ordinance doesn't do anything to help that. If the town wanted to do something more with respect to interiors of obsolete, I mean, most towns approach this that you're grandfathered in if you don't meet current code until you become either so obsolete or dangerous that you have come under some other provision of the code that requires you to fix it for public safety reasons. And that's, I haven't read Minturn's code, but I'm assuming that's the way most are now. And the towns mostly depend upon reports and complaints because they don't have the staffing to go out and really do inspections. And then they depend upon review when somebody submits a permit for renovation. Then they have to bring it up to code, those type of things. This ordinance doesn't affect any of those code provisions.
Thanks, Terry. And I think what Shelley has said is correct. There are a lot of properties in our town that are so old that they are no longer up to code. They're old. Okay.
Well, and the demarcation there though is that not up to code is a common occurrence.
Yeah.
I mean, you may, in the Marshall fires up here in Boulder, the current version of the Uniform Building Code requires all electric appliances. And all those homes need to be rebuilt with gas. People couldn't afford to rebuild them. So that the towns that are affected by the Marshall fire near Boulder have rescinded the current building code to permit the houses to be rebuilt in accordance with the code, the last code. So the real criteria is what happens when it becomes so decrepit that it's dangerous. And other than that, most properties can be used don't have to be brought up to code compliance until they do such amount of renovation that triggers the requirement under the code that it be brought up to current standards.
Thank you. Okay, well, if there's no other comments on this one, we're going to move on to next question from staff. Section 19-8-20, subsection 1A. 19-8-20. Oh, yes. We look to this group to help us understand what would be considered expert testimony. We had this highlighted to get more feedback from folks under criteria for exemption. You could bring in an expert, and we would be interested in seeing the feedback from this committee on what it would constitute an expert in this case. And maybe I can just start off by putting Dr. Flewelling on the spot in case you know of any specific experts that have been used in the past for anything.
Oh, let me think on that one. I know just for economic hardship in general, and with the last question too, that town is not required to let the property owner use the property to whatever use they want, like as long as it's used to some purpose. So that might be an issue with valuing, like valuations of the property, because it could be like, you value the property for certain uses that might influence like how much the property values are. I think I would look toward real estate assessments and things like that as far as expert testimony goes. But I haven't really seen this as a problem, at least in any current local governments that I've been working with.
That's a good sign.
Michelle, I would add that that experts in this category, pertinent to what Tom had said earlier, you might see architects, you might see people who talk about abatement issues, environmental issues, cost of compliance, the cost of moving. You might see engineers, electricians, contractors. There's no limitation or further definition of expert in this ordinance. So, sometimes in the law, we say an expert is somebody who knows something you don't, lives at least 50 miles away. But I don't think it's quite that broad here, but it's basically whatever the commission thinks there's an area of expertise that could be brought in.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen experts come in on the concept of what it does to a historic building to consider the application of solar. And, and what does that do to the roof? Well, and what does it do to the facade and how does it look and all that? So it really that's a very flexible approach, and it is left to the commission as to what they would feel is expert.
Thanks, Terry. Any other committee feedback on this before we move to the next one?
Thank you for that. That was, you put that very eloquently and very clearly. I really appreciate that. Is there a threshold or a parameter that defines what economic hardship is? Or is it, and I apologize for not knowing that if it is spelled out here. But I know it just seems like it's something that's very subjective.
The economic hardship section is pretty extensive. It's
Yeah, there's not
pages talking about
not concrete specific parameters where you could say like, well, if you had to replace 5% of a building, would that be a hardship or not? Rather, the paradigm under 19-8-20 is that all those factors are considered, but because every property is different, the factors may apply in different degrees to a particular property. And then there is, I wouldn't say it's necessarily subjective, but I would say there is an element of judgment that the commission then has to bring to the decision. And it's not, the reason I say it's not subjective is it isn't without guidance. but it's similar. It's not dissimilar to what you face now, without outside the historic context, where you go in to propose a new use for a particular property, and the concept is, does the planning commission believe it fits within the city's the governing documents for the city's planning for the next 10 years, you know, the master documents and the goals of the city, however those are written in the various documents that govern decisions for the town. It's similar to that approach. So it's not something you could do mathematically, but it isn't without guidance.
Understood. So it's, I guess I'm comparing it to someone coming in requesting a variance, and all of the items and issues that go into that. And then, you know, just thinking from a commission standpoint, when decisions need to be made, what those decisions are based on. I do appreciate how this is outlined and that it is extensive, just looking to see if there was some other more concrete, threshold that made it more clear, but I understand what you're saying.
And Lindsay?
I looked up our CLG guidelines and it has a definition for economic hardship. So it might be more clear than what I ramble on about, but it says economic hardship exists only when no reasonable use of a property is available to the owner due to the regulations in the preservation ordinance. The term reasonable use is key. If a property is limited to its use due to the regulation, is limited in its use due to the regulation such that the owner cannot maximize the economic benefits, but there's still a reasonable return, then no takings are found to exist. So the hardship is with the property itself and not with the owner. So one's personal finances are not part of the consideration.
And I would add to that, Lizzie, because what you've recited is the basic status of the constitutional law on takings, and it gives fairly minimal protection to a property owner, because for a property owner to have a taking, they have to be deprived of all economic use, virtually all economic use of their property. And this ordinance is not that harsh. Rather, it puts in a large significant number of criteria to be considered, as well as a shorter list of things that won't be considered, such as neglect by the owner. And so it's an effort to, I would say, I think it leaves a conscientious commission with guidance that is more than just determining whether they've taken all economic value of a property away from an owner. I think it's broader than that. And that while it doesn't have the concrete parameters that were being discussed earlier, I think that they're pretty objective standards that they're to consider. And anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, everybody. The last question from staff to the committee is around Article 9. Which is alteration, relocation, or demolition of non-designated properties greater than 50 years old. So our question to the committee is that all properties over 50 years old are triggered to go through this review process by the Historic Preservation Commission if they're wanting to alter something, demolition something, relocate something. And the question is like Shelley said earlier, there are a lot of old buildings in town. And this would trigger that every single one of those, if a property owner wants to do anything, has to come in first. There's a process that they would have to follow. And we are concerned that there's two pieces. One, this is the catch so that we don't have buildings demolished without any heads up or foreknowledge first. But two, what will this do to the process in Minturn? Will this create something where folks are having to wait a year to get in the door? Like, say, Madison, you had a good example of this, where timing wise, if they don't make it onto a Historic Preservation Commission meeting until A date, and then B date, it takes them B date to get on planning. And by the time they get through that, they might have lost the first summer season of construction. We were concerned about this kind of creating undue hardship to a contractor if it's taking them a year just to get an approval. So maybe we wanted to get feedback on that. Madison, can you more eloquently state what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, of course. So, well, people, I do get applications in the winter time for new houses, so they're ready to hit the ground running in March, April, once the ground has started thawing. Some people do wait and for application for planning commission and until April or May, and they still want to get in the ground. And like last year, there was a demolition at the south end of town for a new house. I'm not sure what the age of that house was, but I believe that they applied kind of early spring, and then they got their building permit early summer. But say that house was over 50 years old, first they would have to go through this minimum, most likely 2 to 3 month process of getting approval, say, hey, yes, you can demolish this, or no, we need more studies, or this needs to go to council for their final determination. So if somebody applies in, let's say, March, that puts them at getting approval or disapproval, just a determination, possibly in June. And then they have to go through the planning commission process, which is a 2 to 3 week process. And then they have to go through the building permit process, which is on the longer end, could be a month. And at that point, you've lost the entire building season, and they now have to wait until the spring of the next year. And so while they have their approval within, let's say, 6 months, and their building permit within 6 months, they can't actually do anything with it until the following year, which staff was concerned put an undue burden on any property owner or homeowner who possibly wanted to come in and buy a lot and demolish the old home because it doesn't have any historic significance, but they can't actually start building and then move into town until a year later.
Yeah, and I would
Madison and Michelle, if I could just clarify a couple points here, because the concept of approval that's being put out there might give the indication that any modification of a structure over 50 years old has to receive approval by the HPC. That's not the case. What's happening, what this section is designed to do is say that if there's an application made for altering or a building that's over 50 years old, there's an initial process that goes to HPC to determine whether that property might be eligible for consideration as a historic property. If the HPC determines that it's not eligible, which can be done much more quickly than the timeframes that we're talking about here, then there's no further involvement of HPC. Everything goes back to the normal planning and building processes. If, however, upon the initial review by HPC, the building is determined to be eligible, then there's got to be a determination whether somebody's going to nominate it. That could be somebody in HPC or the town council or the other parties designated. It's only if that happens that this longer process would then be in play. So if the HPC determined that it may be eligible, and then somebody based upon that made a application to have it considered to be eligible, then you would go through the normal process that's outlined here for consideration of designation of the property as historic. And that would take the time periods that Madison is talking about.
Okay, well, Terry, thank you so much, because Madison and I were concerned about the extension of that process. The way you identified it, I think, is much more with what we were actually trying to do to begin with. So I'm glad we did it to the point where, we catch these things before demolitions are occurring. Does anybody want to provide any feedback on the process that Terry just identified, which is in this ordinance?
Kelly has his hand raised.
Oh, great. Welcome, Kelly.
Hey, sorry, I had technical difficulty. I still think instead of having a sliding 50-year thing, I really think anything before 1950 is really what we should be looking at. And instead of having a 50-year thing, which is going to change. I mean, right now that's a 1972, which I think is kind of silly. Is there any way just to make it like
Well,
you could, you could change 50 years to 75. That would do it.
think we talked
That's
about
gonna
that. Though.
change regularly, though. I mean, no matter what we do, 50 years, 10 years from now, we're going to be looking at structures that are still 50 years old. I mean, by setting a date, I don't think we're meeting the purpose and the intent that we were looking at.
This committee has
I-
discussed 75 years.
I would be supportive of 75 years as well. I think that was the majority of the
Right.
vote on the summary.
I remember that as well.
I think one of the things that I recalled was that we thought coming out of the blocks, maybe we ought to use 50 years and then back off to 75 once we're in the seat, if you will, because we might miss something. And I think that was where we ended up, as I recall in that discussion. It wasn't that it would always be 50, but that maybe we need to have a tight circle around it to start, because we don't know what we don't know. And then when we get into it, just like going from monthly meetings to maybe quarterly, you go from 50 to 75, if that makes sense, once we're in the game.
Sorry, Ken, you mean start with 75 and then drop down to 50 later if we need to?
No. Actually, the opposite is where we ended up. Let's be more inclusive at the front end in the short term, with the ability to go and say, 75, which would exclude a lot of properties that might be included if it was 50, right?
I agree with what Ken is saying, that's where we ended up, was we were going to start with 50 because 75 might be too far out. And we might have or not a lot of buildings, but a couple buildings that might have met that, what everyone wanted to be within that designation might fall outside of it just by that simple 25-year difference. So I agree with what Ken was saying about the 50 to start and then the 75 in the future.
Yes,
And we
sorry
even-
about that. I guess I'm not clear. If we're at roughly 75, that takes us back to including everything after 1950. So we can look at everything built after 1950. And then once we have a grasp on everything, we could drop it back. And then that would be a rolling 1975 moving forward yearly. I guess I'm not understanding that.
If we move it back to 75 years, then we would be looking at everything pre-1950, not post. So if we had anything built in the 1960s or 70 or early 70s that we did want to have designated as the historic property, then that wouldn't be allowed with the 75 years, because that would then push everything to pre-1950.
Thank
And
you,
I'm-
Madison. And that is why I got a 200 on my math SAT.
All right. Let me just say from a structural standpoint, and Minturn may well not fit into this category. This 50-year issue is of much greater significance to communities like Denver that have very large, a number of mid-century modern structures. And it's not so critical if if the things you're looking in your particular town really are, say, 75, or older. But I will say this from a drafting standpoint, if you want a two-step process, we can't really leave that to the discretion. What we would need input from is to say that, for a period of, we'd put a date in here for alterations, et cetera, submitted to the town up to, say, if let's just say your end date was 2027, on or prior to January 1 of 2027, then you look back 50 years. And then after that date, it moves to 75. You would want to build that into your statute so that everybody knows ahead of time that trigger date is occurring. And as opposed to leaving it to the commission to decide whether it should be 50 or 75. I don't think that's a discretionary point. I think it needs to be in the statute.
A couple comments, Terry, on that. Back to Kelly's comment about 75 years. I think one of the things, Kelly, I also remember is we talked about downtown, and we even came up, I think, with a building down there that we would consider historic that was, less than 75 years. I can't remember which one it was when we were talking. So it's just pointing out that they are out there. And then on this last point, Terry, would it be possible that we could say it's 50 years with the possible, I mean, it's 50 years with the possible expansion to 75 years on with council approval.
Well, council could, yes, council could always amend the statute.
Well, isn't that
But
sufficient?
that's
then?
what it would require. That kind of a change would require an amendment.
Yeah, because it's fundamental to the whole district, right? Going from 50 to 75. So I do think to me, it rises to that level. So, I guess my 2 cents worth would be, we start with a tighter lens and then we learn because we don't know what we don't know right now. And as we get into it, we say, God, this is too much of a burden. We're getting a bunch of stuff in here we don't really care about. Council, can you increase that to 75, please, or 65 or whatever the right number is based on our experience?
The town council can always amend. And I don't know that putting in a provision saying that they can do what they already can do without any mandatory obligation to consider that is very meaningful. So I guess my response to that is, if that's really what your concern is and you want experience, then you would leave it at 50. And if the situation developed where the staff or HPC or everybody thought that it wasn't workable, then you would amend. But if you instead want an automatic shift, then you put in a date, an ending date for the 50-year consideration period and a start date for the 75-year. We could do it either way, but I don't think we add anything by saying that if we don't like the 50 down the road, we can ask council to change it. That's always true.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't saying we would put it in there, but yeah. I just don't know if we know enough to set a date right now. That's my only comment. I just don't know. I don't know what the process is going to be and how our experience will be.
Well, I just know we don't have any mid-century moderns worth preserving like Denver does. And I think the one building in question was old, but it had been remodeled, which would be, I think it was the antique store in the 100 block.
Yep.
But really, I can't think of any mid-century modern buildings in this town that exist or anything worth historic significance that I know of.
Lindsay, let's get your comment in here.
I was going to say it is something to be careful about. I was just on a call with Breckenridge and they had the 50-year rule, and they're saying that property owners were demolishing their properties once they hit 48 or 49 years old because they knew that they would have to go through this extra review once they got to 50 years. So if you think there might be anything, in that in-between period, then it's probably worth keeping it, to the 50-year rule instead of 75. So,
okay.
Then, having a date where it might change specified down the line could also lead to similar problems, or people just wait to demolish their property until, the second that the regulations change. So just issues that come up when people know that these things are in play.
Right, good insight. I am wondering, does everybody on this Zoom call know how to raise your hands? Electronically not your actual hand.
I've got it. I figured it out. I just found
it.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for a vote by raise of hand, and staff, being myself, Madison, Terry, and Lindsay, will not be voting. But for everybody that would like to see Article 9 remain at 50 years, can you raise your hand, please?
Oops.
Okay, so we have 3 votes that people want to keep it at 50 years. No, now we're at 2.
Oh, wait, sorry.
3. Okay, so we have 3 votes to keep it at 50 years. And so you can lower your hands if everyone knows how to do that. And can we see a raise of hands for those that would like to see this at 75? Okay, good. I was like, can I force people to vote? You have to vote for one. Yes, we currently have a 3-3 tie. How perfect.
And there's 8 people who are not staff on this call. So 2 people have not voted.
All right, well, I guess we're stuck with a tie. But this is good information that we can then take to Planning Commission and to the council. Thank you all very much for that feedback.
What if we put 60 years?
Right? Is that a compromise? Okay, that was the last question that staff had for the committee. And then we wanted to open it up for committee comments, feedback, and questions to staff and our experts. So Jenna, your hand is raised. And I don't know if that's from the vote, but if you have a question, we're thrilled to take it.
It was from the vote.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So if anyone has questions about specific sections, please feel free to ask so that we can start to all have a better understanding of what we're looking to accomplish here. If no one has any questions, we'll assume you all thought this was great work.
I do think this is great work, you guys. Thank you for doing everything.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. And I think you guys as staff covered some of the questions that I had. So there's no reason to raise them a second time. So
That's also appreciated.
Yeah, this is a massive undertaking. From my standpoint, I appreciate everything that's been done, the amount of work that's been put into this, and Lindsay and Terry, thank you so much for your input. It's massive help in this process.
One thing that I can quickly bring up is that Jim Seven, who has been on other calls, but it's not on the call tonight, sent in an email asking if things like painting of a home or replacing windows in their current location would require or trigger going through this full process. Now, Minturn's pretty proud that we don't, or I think Minturn's pretty proud that we don't, monitor colors of homes and things of the such. Is this team comfortable with things like that? That we don't oversee those things. You can paint your house any color you want. And if you're replacing windows in the same place for the same purpose, I don't think it doesn't trigger this. Am I right on that, Terry?
Well, the windows is the color, yes. And the
Good,
color
'cause
only
that
comes
could have
into
been an
play.
issue down the
Yeah,
road.
the color may come into play if somebody gets their property designated historic and takes tax
Mhm,
and does an easement and takes tax credits, then that becomes an
Oh.
issue, that alteration. But
mhm.
Okay.
but windows are a very they're a touchy subject because the historic, much of historic properties, the way the windows look, not necessarily what they're made of, because you can make a fiberglass window look like a wood window, but for example, double hung versus a window that just has a single pane, those are alterations which typically do come into play in consideration of an alteration of historic structure. So just because you're putting a different piece of glass in the same opening, I would not say that's an alteration that's excluded. If it's visible from the exterior, if it's part of the exterior change, I think it would
Okay.
come under the statute.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say.
I want to echo that as well. I mean, the windows, it's the proportions of the windows, the muntin pattern, the operation of the window. I mean, if something's considered a historic structure, that plays into a huge aspect of it.
Shelley?
I agree because, you look at some of your older windows and the different paint like that. I think that's, that's part of that historical significance of that property. So, just switching them to you can get the same look in some of the newer windows. But it would be something that would need to be, I think, it would have to be evaluated by someone if they're going to change out something like that. I agree.
Jenna?
Yeah, I want to echo that too. And I also think, for instance, the little white and greenhouse in the 100 block, I come from the land of the city is from the 1700s. When you get into the Victorian-esque color schemes where you have a contrast on the eaves and things like that, it is important. I think, to do both. The windows are definitely something that's a little tricky, but there's such great windows out there that mimic some of that old look. I'm not too worried about it, but I get the whole Minturn's funky, eclectic, and paint it whatever you want to. But when you're talking about historic and you're trying to be indicative of a certain era, they didn't necessarily have the color schemes that we have today as far as the gamut of colorings. I would, if you're really going to take it seriously and do historic, then you really should look at the color schemes that were of that specific time period.
I think that this group needs to talk about that, because that's certainly an adjustment to Minturn in general,
Yeah.
but I think has some merit. You know, Kelly, you know, you just helped Larry with his, I would look to a lot of our folks that have done that and get a feel for how folks feel about that.
I would say, I mean, I've remodeled and stripped through many layers of paint, and I am amazed by how many wonderful, bright, vibrant colors used to exist in this town and have now been muted because of real estate prices, I believe, and conservatism. But I've stripped some pieces of wood that maybe have 10 different colors of paint, and it's like every bright, vibrant color used to exist. And I'm still all for encouraging people to paint bright, fun colors. And I don't know how to encourage people not to paint their houses beige, but I would love to personally.
Oh, no, and I agree with you, Kelly. I'm not saying that it has to be boring. I'm just saying that there's two different colors used in one sitting. There's not just one monochromatic house.
Right.
Everything's the same. There always had some sort of accents, whatever it was. But you know, realistically, you don't want to, you know, from a passerby, you don't want to, the salmon house, I don't know, with a green trim, man, that's a little hard to take. It has to be something of reason.
The kids did pick that out, though.
Ken, did you
No,
have a
they-
comment on that?
Yeah, if I could, sorry about that. If I could just jump in real quick. You know, we talk about historic significance and what I don't know that we have. I would say if we have record of a house during a certain time where we're calling on the historic significance of that house of being the red schoolhouse or something to that effect, I think at that point we want to maintain it. But I mean, you know, yeah, the whole idea of the vibrant colors, it works in with what we're trying to achieve. In my opinion, if it's, we also need to be sensitive to the materials used in renovations, not just the windows, especially if it's in a place where it's, you know, within a certain distance, within human contact, within where an eye can perceive the quality of a material. We can talk about a mutton pattern in a window, but if it's a snap-in grill, it's not going to have any significance to it versus, you know, an actual divided light. So maybe we just need to spend more time and focus on this part of it. Personally, I'm not as concerned about the color portion of it unless the color is specific to the historic value of the property.
Let me just say, under the current iteration of the ordinance, we define an alteration as something that is done to an exterior architectural feature. So that would pick up windows, but would not necessarily pick up colors. If the group decides, or the town decides that it wants to include colors as an element of alteration, then we would have to expand the definition of alteration.
And Lindsay, you can expand on that.
I was wondering if you address routine maintenance in the ordinance?
Yes, we get into a maintenance section. Yes.
Like,
There
yeah,
is
generally-
1911-10 goes over maintenance.
So generally, Lindsay, there's a requirement that the exterior features of a historic property be maintained and any interior features that are essentially structural elements that support the exterior.
No,
But-
well, I meant like routine maintenance that wouldn't require a certificate of appropriateness. So things like regular painting or, you know, repairing windows, repairing small sections of your roof, shingles, things like that. I know some places have like just a list of those sort of pre-approved projects if they're, under 100 square feet of roofing material or things like that that are replacing like for like. That can be a way to kind of limit the number of small projects that are coming before the HPC.
I'm actually interested in getting feedback from, I want to go back to the paint as well, but I think it would be great to get feedback from this group on how this group feels about a potential consolidated list on things that a historic property owner could do without having to go to the HPC.
I think that'd be awesome.
I agree. Yeah, I think otherwise we're going to get clogged up
Yeah.
at town.
Well, I also think that some buildings don't qualify necessarily in the categories or the parameters that's set for historic, but maybe they want to, be more complimentary to their neighbor or something of that nature, or they like that flair. So I think that's a really good educational and incentive for people to bring their properties into a different light, let's just say.
Okay, that's under maintenance. Lindsay, you said that there was some basic lists that could be followed.
I can send you some examples of sort of pre-approved projects.
That's perfect, because what can happen is Lindsay will send me that list and I will shoot that list out to our whole historic preservation committee kickoff team and look for basically an email vote on what items should be included in that list.
I think it's a good idea to plant that seed as well, because if these buildings are going to age and they're not going to change, to say they're going to start to look more historic. I just think that it's going to be more systematic that way.
I agree.
Okay, standard list that doesn't need HPC approval. Okay. And then back to paint. Can we get raised hands for everybody that does not want to see paint regulated?
Can I make a comment first?
You're trying to influence the vote?
No. I just wanted to offer some. I was really, I thought something that Greg said was really wise, and that is I wonder if there's a way to say if the color is an important signature for the building, historical signature for the building. I thought that was a really great way of saying it. And so I'm not trying to stop your process. That was a question I wanted to ask is that something we could consider? Because I could see doing that. If there's some building like the Red Schoolhouse example he gave, I can't think of a building that's like that in town, but Kelly probably can.
I agree with Ken. I also think that what I was getting at, it was complementary colors, not like colors that were so outlandish that it really detracted from the look of the historic nature is what I was getting at, not specific colors, just something in the realm that it looks like it's a cohesive building, not a statement piece.
So
I agree with Ken too.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Ken.
Maybe
Jen,
what
I
we're,
hear
oh,
what
go
you're
ahead,
saying
Greg,
as
sorry.
well. Sorry about that. I don't mean to interrupt you. Jenna brings up a good point as well. In this, there's, is there an outlier that's going to paint their house fluorescent green?
Right.
And it's a historic structure. And is that, all right, we're Minturn, we're funky.
Right.
Do we go with it? Like, is that what we do? Or do we, are we trying to define something, define properties that are, not sacred, but that have a little bit more limitation to them?
Right.
I agree with that comment as well.
Mm-hmm.
As do I. However, if someone was under 50 years and they wanted to paint their house fluorescent green today, they
Yeah.
so,
Good point, Shelley. Good point.
We
I
don't,
get it.
we're not regulating color in the town of Minturn, and
Sure.
working in a municipality that regulates colors. Even if you want to paint your White House white, you have to come to our board, and it's a pain in the ass. I'm just gonna call it out as what it is. It is a pain in the ass, and people don't understand. I would just want to paint my White House white. I'm just doing maintenance to it. Well, when you're repainting your entire house, you're not just doing maintenance. So, I think there needs to be some parameters, but if we're going to start regulating colors, we have to start regulating colors. Period. And not saying that we're going to disallow a specific color. If someone wants to repaint their house purple, then, I mean, go for it. But, I mean, if we can't just regulate houses that are over 50 years old and not the rest of the town, because then, you might make someone feel like you're devaluing their property because now all the houses around them are these bright colors, and because theirs is over 50 years old, they can't do anything. So I just think it's a fine line, but regulating colors is definitely going to be an increase to staff time.
How about we just encourage people to respect the historic flavor of the building or something of nature, something general, but encourages that, doesn't take away or doesn't, they could go, no, I want a fluorescent house, but at least it keeps them in like, oh yeah, that's probably true. We probably should keep the colors indicative of something.
Yeah.
So part of this is going to be that whoever's on the commission is going to have to go through and do an inventory and an evaluation. And maybe as part of that process, there may be specific properties where, it's there, the color is an important part of the historic nature of that property, and it's identified for that property. My guess is there aren't going to be any, but yeah, Shelley, that's a great point.
From a drafting perspective, I'm hearing actually two alternatives here. You could do one or both. The first one, the concept of adding color as one of the potential elements for consideration of historic designation, that's pretty straightforward. We could do that. And then I think it's the second category of basically going forward, what happens with respect to colors generally for historic properties. That's the much broader topic that you're drafting something like that in here. I think I understand entirely the thrust of it, but I can tell you that in covenant control communities, there's probably more battles about color than anything else, because there's an element to it that's in the eye of the beholder. There is no color you won't find somewhere showing up in a historic building somewhere. So you just need to be, I would just suggest, if you're trying to create those parameters, be mindful of the broad the spectrum of differences of views of color is much broader than the beige colors we see every day. So be careful what you ask for.
Okay. I'm tempted to ask one final question on color, Terry. Sorry. Is the topic that was brought up about a color being of historical significance, and again, I'm not coming up with any home or property either. Is that something that the Historic Preservation Committee can identify when they designate a historic property, so that they're in the historic property moving forward maintains that color? Is that something that's done?
Are you asking that generally, or was that a specific question?
Oh no, that's to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I can envision that a structure. Remember, historic isn't necessarily historic. Can be a building. It can also be a statue. It can also be a structure that's doesn't qualify as a building, and I can envision elements that are of where color is a historic feature. For example, art installation that's declared historic would be the best example. Some of the wall arts that we have today that came in the 60s and are already being declared historic on the sides of buildings. Certainly the colors there mean something. So I do believe that you could include some level of definition of statement that when you're considering a historic property or a historic structure for designation or a site, that color can be a consideration. And if it is, then that would be an element that you would set forth in your approval. HPCA's approval so that it would become something that would be carried forward. I'll give you a really good example of that in Colorado. It still every day reminds everybody in the city of two opposite sides. It's when the group that repainted the top of our Capitol building in Denver, the state capitol, chose a blue color that's many believe is not historic and is ugly. And there's still a raging controversy over whether that should ever have been approved, given the state capitol is a historic building. So those issues, you can differ on, but with respect to something where, and our art installation is probably the easiest to think of. Obviously, the color is critical because you don't want someone coming in and deciding, well, I wish all those historic colors of the artist were now more modern colors. Let's change that.
Mhm.
But you might remember they tried to do in Colorado when someone in the state proposed changing Colorful Colorado to a Google-like sign that had multiple colors. It created outrage across the state. And when you enter the state, we have our Colorful Colorado sign, which doesn't have any colors in it. And somebody wanted to make it look like Google. So they proposed that the state change that to have multiple colors. And that just created all kinds of interesting conversations and was ultimately dropped.
So, Terry, do you think when the HPC is voting on a recommendation for a landmark, they would say, like in our findings, that this color, as part of their findings, they would say the color is a key character defining feature?
And I haven't seen that before, but I'm thinking you could do that because it's an element of, it could be, I can see it, it could be an element of consideration. A bronze statue ought to remain bronze, not be painted, purple. And so I could see that could be included as an element of consideration. And then, and I could see writing something, it's not in the model ordinance, but writing something in here that would permit HPC to designate that as an architect. Basically what we would say is this color, this historic color is an architectural element. And by defining the specific color as an architectural element, you would automatically bring it within the requirement of approval like any other alteration.
Mm-hmm. And then it would be part of your findings when you designate it.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
That's
Terry,
pretty great.
can I give you an example of, because like I'm hoping one of the first kind of guinea pig historic designations will be the tank, the Minturn tank up on the hillside. And I personally can't imagine, I can't imagine anyone painting the tank a different color. Maybe other people can. But so does that mean that the silver or the gray or whatever color it is, along with the name Minturn on it, could be designated with that tank when it's designated historic?
I think we could draft a provision that would provide for that.
Okay.
It is, I won't say that's not currently in the ordinance,
Right.
but I think we could do that. Yes.
It's important we get feedback from this group on that, since we really want to follow what this group wants to see happen. Can we get a show of hands for folks that want that ability by the commission to designate a specific structure's specific color ever?
Because of historical significance.
Right.
Because we want to do that. Because I
Right.
think that the slippery slope, if we start regulating colors, I mean, it can be really a mess. Okay. With that
Okay.
caveat, I'm on board.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Madison, you said we had 8 people. It's
All right,
awesome.
do it
So we
again.
still are at 4-4. You're at 3-3 before, and now we're at 4-0.
I'll tell you a crazy story, Terry, real quick. The project I was involved in is the Pearl Brewery down in San Antonio. It's a 30-acre project. Anyway, and to get federal historic tax credits, they required us to maintain a beige paint on the brick. And the paint was locking in moisture and the bricks were disintegrating. It was just awful. And it had this beautiful pink underneath, in the mortar in between.
Yes.
I mean, it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And so we just finally gave them the finger and just said, we're going to forego the tax, which was the
paint
best
issues
decision we ever made.
Yeah.
But it can be a real nightmare. So we just have to be really limited in what we do here.
Yeah, I think that's pretty specific though. I mean, if it's gonna degrade the building, it's a little bit of an exception to the
You
rules.
do see
so
that
to
happening
speak.
though, largely
Yeah.
because
What they did was they
lots of people don't understand,
Yeah,
the composition softness of old brick. I was involved in a battle where a group wanted to repaint a locomotive in a public park that was black, of course, and white, and they wanted to repaint it in more relevant modern colors to make it attractive to children. And that was a real battle that we did win, and we kept it historic. But those things happen.
our fight was the period of significance was 1956, and we wanted to go back to 1888,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
and they fought us on it, but we were trying to get real authentic. Anyway, I'm just saying
I get it. Yeah.
this could be real torturous if we're not careful.
All right. Kelly, you have a comment?
Yeah, can I show you this picture? Can you see this?
No,
No? Can you see me?
no.
No? How do I do that? How do I do that?
Are you on a computer?
Yeah.
Madison's heading over now.
It should be in the bottom left of your screen
Or the top?
Or the top?
or the top.
Q&A, mute, start video,
Start video. That's what you want.
okay, yeah.
start video. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see you.
see.
Okay, yeah, we can kind of see.
Yes. I see what looks
So
like
this
a
is a-
multicolored donut.
Tie-dye,
This is
man.
This is a corbel off of the Thai kitchen. This
Ah.
when we sanded it. This picture shows how many different colors that building has been painted over 140 years. So this kind of is my point, how colorful this town has been throughout our history. Just that one piece of wood. And then here is another existing pre-1970 room in Minturn that exists to this day. That is your lime fluorescent green. So that is technically a historic color for this town, by the way.
It's not the leprechaun room at the turntable, is it?
No.
We're not,
Okay.
Kelly,
But-
just to speak to that, I think we're all on the same page that we're not trying to limit everybody on colors unless they're, like Michelle said, the water tower. That's always been that color, and the contrast, the lettering, the font that it is in, that has a historical significance. And I don't know that there are any buildings that we'll find around town that have a color, but I think it's worth having in there, right? I think if we're going through and looking at a structure and we're interviewing people, we're talking to people in the community, and somebody comes up and is like, yeah, that house was, bright fuchsia, and it was always bright fuchsia until 1950. And everybody used to call it, they knew to go to that house because it was that color. I think that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that there's something in here that we can preserve a historical aspect of that structure, if and only if, not only if, but if it deals with the color of it. I don't think any of us want to put a limitation on a building to, allow somebody to go in and paint it a funky color, if it's important because it's a downtown building that's been there for a long time.
And I would encourage maybe asking Randy Milhone, who is the one that's responsible for painting most of the downtown buildings. And he might have some insight, but all I know is change is the one thing that we've done throughout the years, except for maybe the water tower, just because they used the silver because it was really good at Rust Railroad used it, and it was all those industrial buildings were painted silver usually. But Randy's paint job was very, very controversial when he did all those downtown buildings, and people were complained because said they would crash their cars into buildings because the buildings were so brightly colored. And now we're kind of known for that, which is kind of funny. But I just know it's people have these buildings have changed and metamorphosized over the time. Most of the old houses, they usually had red or forest screen windows, and just a huge, amazing selection of color throughout my 20 years of remodeling in this town. It just makes me happy and blows my mind every time I dig into an old building here and see what used to exist. And hopefully we can get back to that someday. And I would do whatever we can do to encourage people to take a leap and have some fun, because that's what we were known for and throughout our history.
I agree with you. I work in a town that everything has to be earth tones. Trust me when I say that I miss the color.
That's terrible.
If anything, I would say I would love to ban beige and black.
I support that, except for
If
the
it's a
black.
Yeah.
I'm getting really sick of every single trim being black, but
Agreed.
Okay, well, we will follow that color discussion, since it was a 4, and 4 not. We'll see where that ends up. But at this point, you know, we're 15 minutes early, and I can give 15 minutes back to everybody if there are no other comments or questions. And again, we're going to be taking this next to Planning Commission, and we hope that everybody will consider giving their feedback at Planning Commission, either in person via Zoom or by writing comments into the Planning Commission. We will do a write-up of this entire process with this committee that will be included with the draft ordinance that makes it to Planning Commission with all of your feedback, so that they can see everything that's been done to date. And then, of course, after that, it's to the council, which again, feedback is critical. So we thank everybody for your time, and we hope you'll continue to participate in this process.
Thank you guys for doing all the work. I did notice that there was a typo, and I think it was under the 1 monthly meeting event on the third one down. It said evidence of was 1 word. So just want to point that out.
We're still working on some of the
Yep.
spacing, which got tricky when we have in formatting.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. And also, if there's any way when you have like a capitalized word or a group of words that are indicative of a defined term, like place of significance, what does that mean? I know that's going to probably go into Muni code, which allows you to have links back to that particular definition to keep people, so we can go back and forth and make sure that this is a new code aspect. Anything like that would, technically speaking, would be awesome to have, just to skip around so that people aren't searching for something that they can't find. Me and technical.
Well, thank you, everybody, very much. We appreciate your time and hope you'll continue to participate in this process. And it's been a big lift. We're still got quite a long ways to go, but we're getting there.
Well, congratulations, guys. I mean, you guys, the team's really done a good job. We're not done yet, but we're on our way. Thanks.
Yeah, it's we've been lucky to get Terry. He's been dealing with my sarcasm for the last several months. And I'm really
It's been a joy to work with everybody. It's really been a fun project.
So,
All right.
all right. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good night.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.